We believed we were alone, but you've been watching us all this time, haven't you? Tell me the truth.
There are rooms in this world that don't exist on any blueprint. Corridors with no names, schedules written in code. I spent 3 decades in one of those rooms, a sterile chamber buried beneath a facility that officially studies atmospheric pressure and satellite telemetry. But what I studied wasn't atmospheric. It wasn't from any satellite. It was alive, conscious, and it had been waiting longer than any of us realized. My name is Dr. Jonathan Reeves. I hold a doctorate in xenobiology, a field that, according to public record, doesn't exist. I was recruited in 1987, fresh out of my postdoctoral work in comparative cognition at MIT. They told me I'd be consulting on anomalous biological specimens. They didn't tell me I'd spend the next 30 years in conversation with something that shouldn't be possible. The being we called Subject Epsilon 7 was recovered in 1952 near White Sands, New Mexico. Not from the Roswell incident, as conspiracy theorists love to speculate, but from a separate event entirely. A silent touchdown. No crash, no wreckage, just arrival, and then capture. When I first entered Chamber 14C on a cold January morning in 1987, I expected fear. I expected revulsion. What I felt instead was recognition, not of its form, which was undeniably alien, but of something in its eyes. A weariness, a patience, as if it had been waiting not for rescue, but for someone willing to listen. It stood roughly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and skin the color of deep water under moonlight, translucent in some lights, iridescent in others. Its face was geometric, almost sculptural, with large, unblinking eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect. It didn't move much. It didn't need to. Its presence filled the room like a low-frequency hum you feel in your chest before you hear it. For the first 3 years, we didn't speak. We observed. We documented. We tested, ethically, always ethically, though I know that sounds like a contradiction. But by 1990, something shifted. It began to respond. Not with words at first, but with patterns, gestures, drawings made with a single finger on the condensation of the glass barrier. And eventually, through a neural interface we developed together, it spoke. What it said changed everything I thought I knew about humanity, about consciousness, about why we're really here. They called it the Epsilon Protocol, a framework designed not for interrogation, but for dialogue. That distinction mattered. From the beginning, the project's lead architect, Dr. Helena Voss, insisted on one non-negotiable principle. Subject Epsilon 7 was not a prisoner. It was a guest we couldn't let leave. The ethics were impossible, of course. You can't hold a sentient being against its will and call it hospitality. But the alternative, releasing it into a world that would either weaponize it or destroy it out of fear, seemed worse. So we existed in that gray space where good intentions collided with unavoidable harm. My daily routine was monastic in its structure. I'd arrive at 0600, pass through 7 security checkpoints, surrender my personal electronics, and descend 4 levels below ground. The facility smelled like recycled air and industrial disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed constantly. There were no windows, no clocks. Time became something you measured by the subject's subtle shifts in bioluminescence, the internal circadian rhythm we never fully decoded. Chamber 14C was 20 feet square, climate controlled to 62 degrees Fahrenheit with 45% humidity. Conditions Subject Epsilon 7 seemed to prefer, though it never complained. One wall was reinforced polycarbonate, 3 inches thick, allowing observation. The others were smooth titanium composite, a simple cot, a water source, no restraints. I could move freely within that space, though it rarely did. My station was on the other side of the glass, a desk cluttered with monitors, biometric sensors, neural interface equipment, and stacks of handwritten notes. I preferred pen and paper for initial observations. Something about the tactile process helped me think. Subject Epsilon 7 spent most of its time sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, hands resting on its knees, eyes half closed, meditating perhaps, or simply waiting. Its breathing was so slow I'd sometimes have to check the sensors to confirm it was still alive. 4 breaths per minute. Heart rate, if that's what the rhythmic pulsing in its thorax was, averaged 12 beats per minute. It ate sparingly, vegetables mostly, raw grains, water. It refused meat of any kind, and after the first year, we stopped offering. It slept, or entered some analogous state, for roughly 3 hours every 30, in short cycles that didn't align with human circadian patterns. During these periods, its skin would darken to near black, and the bioluminescent patterns along its forearms and temples would pulse gently, like distant lightning. The other researchers rotated in and out. Security clearances expired. People transferred. Had breakdowns. One colleague, Dr. Demarcus Chen, lasted 6 months before requesting reassignment. I can't stop feeling like we're the ones being studied, he told me on his last day. He wasn't wrong, but I stayed. Partly because I'd signed documents that made leaving complicated. Partly because I was the only one Subject Epsilon 7 seemed willing to engage with. Mostly because I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the most important work anyone had ever done, and I was the only one doing it right. The breakthrough came in 1990, during what we called the sequence event. I'd been attempting to establish basic symbolic communication using geometric shapes, triangle for food, circle for water, square for rest, simple association, Pavlovian almost. I felt embarrassed by the crudeness of it, but we had to start somewhere. Subject Epsilon 7 watched these attempts with what I can only describe as patient amusement. Then, one morning it stood, a rare movement that always commanded attention, and walked to the glass. With one long finger it traced a shape in the condensation from the humidity differential, a double helix, DNA. Then it pointed at me, then at itself. Then it drew a tree, branches, splitting, roots spreading, a phylogenetic tree, the universal diagram of evolutionary relationship. I understood immediately. It was telling me we shared common ancestry, not metaphorically, literally. My hands were shaking as I initiated the genetic sampling protocol we'd had on standby for years. Within weeks, the results confirmed what Subject Epsilon 7 had already known. Our DNA shared 47% similarity. Not close enough to be relatives, but far too close to be coincidence. We weren't studying an alien, we were studying a cousin, a branch of life that had diverged millions of years ago and evolved elsewhere, under different conditions, toward different solutions, but from the same source. That's when everything changed. Because if we shared origins, then communication wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. We just needed the right language. Dr. Voss authorized the Neural Interface Project in late 1991. A team of neuroscientists and engineers spent 2 years developing a non-invasive system, essentially a sophisticated EEG array combined with pattern recognition AI and haptic feedback. The idea was simple. If we could map the neural signatures of specific thoughts or concepts in my brain, correlate them with observable responses in Subject Epsilon 7's neural activity, we could establish a bridge, a translator. Subject Epsilon 7 cooperated fully. It would sit motionless for hours while we calibrated sensors, adjusted frequencies, and ran endless test sequences. It never showed frustration, never refused. It simply participated. On March 15th, 1993, the interface worked. I thought the word water, and a symbol appeared on the shared display between us, a symbol Subject Epsilon 7 had drawn weeks earlier. It saw the symbol, it looked at me, and through the interface a concept bloomed in my mind, clear as my own thought but distinctly other, understanding. I wept. Right there at my station, in front of cameras and colleagues and security monitors, because after 6 years of silence, we could finally speak. And what it had to say would haunt me for the rest of my life. The early conversations were fragmentary, concepts rather than sentences, emotions without words. The interface translated neural patterns into rough approximations, impressions of meaning that I'd then have to interpret and articulate. It was like trying to describe music to someone who'd never heard sound, using only the vocabulary of color. But Subject Epsilon 7 was patient, extraordinarily so. It would repeat concepts, layer them with context, build scaffolding around ideas until I could grasp their shape. And slowly, over weeks and months, we developed a shared vocabulary. The first coherent exchange happened in May 1993. I asked the question that had been burning in me since the day I arrived. Why are you here? The response came not as words, but as a cascade of images and feelings through the interface. I saw vast distances, darkness studded with stars, a sense of searching, purpose. Then Earth, blue and fragile and beautiful, appearing like a jewel in the void. And with it, a feeling I can only describe as homecoming. Not home as in origin, but home as in return. Recognition, remembering. I tried to narrow the question. Are there others? Your people? Another cascade. This time, the feeling was complex. Loss, distance, but not loneliness. More like diaspora. Many lights scattered across darkness, each separate but connected by invisible threads. I understood. Subject Epsilon 7 wasn't alone in the universe, but it was alone here. Why did you come to Earth specifically? This answer took longer. Subject Epsilon 7 closed its eyes, both the large primary eyes and the smaller secondary pair above them that I'd only recently noticed. The bioluminescence along its temples pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat visualized. Through the interface came a concept so dense I almost couldn't process it. Observation, documentation, witness, and beneath that, something else. Something that made my blood run cold. Warning. I leaned forward, heart pounding. Warning about what? Subject Epsilon 7 opened its eyes, looked directly at me through 3 inches of polycarbonate and 6 years of carefully maintained boundaries. And I felt, more than heard, a single word that the interface translated into English. Yourselves. Dr. Voss reviewed the transcripts with her characteristic clinical detachment. She sat across from me in the observation room, reading glasses perched on her nose, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the desk between us. It could be a psychological projection, she said finally. Your interpretation of ambiguous neural data. We see what we expect to see. Helena, you watched the session. You saw the coherence metrics. The pattern stability was 94%. That's not noise, that's communication. She removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes. She looked older than when we'd started. We all did. Jonathan, if Subject Epsilon 7 is genuinely suggesting it came here to warn us about ourselves, We need to know more. Specifically, what about ourselves? Are we talking extinction event, environmental collapse, nuclear war? Because if this is predictive intelligence, if they have some kind of precognitive capability, it's not precognitive, I interrupted. It's observational. They watch. That's what it said. They've been watching for a long time. Watching what? Everything. The development of consciousness, tool use, language, art, violence, all of it. And they've seen it before. Voss went very still. Before. Where? Other worlds, other species, other versions of this? I gestured vaguely, meaning everything. Evolution, civilization, intelligence eating itself alive. She stood, walked to the observation window. Below us, Subject Epsilon 7 sat motionless in its perpetual meditation. If that's true, she said quietly, then what happened to them? Those other species? That's what I asked next. The answer came 3 days later, during a session where I'd pushed harder than usual. I'd prepared a series of visual prompts. Images from human history, the Bronze Age collapse, the fall of Rome, colonial genocide, Hiroshima, the Holocaust, Chernobyl, climate graphs showing atmospheric CO2 levels, deforestation data, ocean acidification. I wasn't sure if Subject Epsilon 7 would recognize these as meaningful. Its understanding of human culture was uncertain. We'd never established how much it comprehended about our civilization beyond the walls of Chamber 14C. But when I displayed the images through the shared interface, its reaction was immediate and visceral. Its bioluminescence flared bright enough to trigger the light sensors, and I felt something I'd never felt from it before. Grief. Not for itself, for us. I steadied myself. You've seen this pattern before, haven't you? On other worlds? Yes. The simplicity of the confirmation was almost worse than elaborate explanation would have been. What happened to them? Those other species? Subject Epsilon 7 stood, always a significant gesture, and approached the glass barrier. It placed one long-fingered hand against the surface. Through the interface, I felt an invitation. I stood, walked to my side of the glass, placed my hand opposite its. The barrier was cold. I could feel the faint vibration of the climate control systems through it. And through the neural interface, Subject Epsilon 7 showed me. I saw worlds. Dozens of them, some Earth-like, others utterly alien, but all bearing the unmistakable signatures of intelligence, structures, lights, patterns imposed on wilderness. And I saw them rise. Civilizations blooming like time-lapse flowers, complex and beautiful and fragile. Then I saw them fall, not from external threats, not from asteroid impacts or gamma-ray bursts or alien invasions. They fell from within, from the same pattern, repeated across worlds and species and epochs. Intelligence reaching a threshold where it could reshape its environment faster than it could understand the consequences. Power outpacing wisdom, technology outrunning ethics. Some destroyed themselves quickly. Nuclear fire, biological warfare, nanotechnology run amok. Others slowly. Resources exhausted, ecosystems collapsed, populations crashed into permanent decline. A few simply stopped, lost the will to continue, turned inward until their civilizations were just memories and ruins. But the pattern was always the same. The species would reach a critical point where it had to choose between growth and sustainability, between power and restraint, between individual desires and collective survival. And almost always, they chose wrong. Almost always, I thought, grasping at that word like a lifeline. Subject Epsilon 7 withdrew its hand, returned to its sitting position, and through the interface came something I hadn't expected. Hope. We are still watching, it communicated. Because sometimes a species chooses differently. The implications hit me over the following weeks like a slow-motion avalanche. Subject Epsilon 7 wasn't just a visitor, it was an anthropologist, an archivist, part of some vast, patient effort to document the evolution of consciousness across the galaxy, and to bear witness to the civilizations that rose and fell in that terrible space between awareness and wisdom. But why? To what end? I asked this directly in our next session. Subject Epsilon 7's response was complex, layered with concepts the interface struggled to translate. The closest I could come was, so that something survives, so that the attempt is remembered. They were archivists of failure, witnesses to extinction, keepers of a cosmic cemetery where each grave marker was an entire world. The thought was almost unbearable. How many? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. How many species have you watched rise and fall? The number that came through the interface wasn't precise, their mathematics operated differently than ours. But the impression was clear. Hundreds, possibly thousands, across millions of years and countless star systems. And humanity was just the latest entry in that catalog of beautiful, doomed experiments in consciousness. But you said, almost always, I pressed. That means some survived. Some made it through. What did they do differently? Subject Epsilon 7 was quiet for a long time. The bioluminescence along its body pulsed, and what I'd learned was its equivalent of deep thought. Finally, it approached the interface console directly, something it rarely did. Through the connection, it shared a memory. Not its own, I realized, but something passed down through its people. A record, I saw a world of endless oceans and island archipelagos, a species that had evolved in water but learned to manipulate fire, creating civilization at the boundary between sea and air. They'd reached their critical threshold, discovering fusion energy, developing genetic engineering, gaining the power to reshape their world, and they'd stopped. Not from fear, not from technological limitation. They'd simply looked at what they were becoming, at the trajectory they were on, and collectively chosen a different path. They'd established limits, forbidden certain technologies, prioritized sustainability over expansion, chose enough over more. It had cost them. There had been factions who wanted to continue, who saw restraint as cowardice. There had been conflict, schisms. Some left their world entirely, disappearing into the void. But the majority stayed and chose differently. Are they still alive? I asked. That species? Yes. And with that affirmation came a feeling of profound respect. They had been alive for over 200,000 years, not expanding, not conquering, just persisting, thriving within boundaries they'd set for themselves. They were proof it was possible. So that's why you're here, I said, understanding crystallizing. To see if we can do it too, if we can be one of the ones who survive. To witness, Subject Epsilon 7 corrected gently. Not to judge, not to interfere, only to watch, and to remember. The weight of that responsibility, of being watched by something ancient and wise while we stumbled toward either transcendence or extinction, was crushing. I left that session and went directly to Voss's office. She was reviewing budget allocations for the coming fiscal year, a task that seemed absurdly trivial in the wake of what I'd just learned. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, if this is true, if Subject Epsilon 7's people have really been documenting intelligent species across the galaxy for that long, then they must have records, data, comparative analysis. That information could be invaluable, and we could learn from those other species' mistakes, avoid their pitfalls. Helena, we need to extract that information, Jonathan, systematically. Create a comprehensive database. The potential applications for policy, for technology development, for strategic planning. You're not listening, I cut her off. They're not here to help us. They're here to witness, to remember. They won't give us the answers. That defeats the entire purpose. Then what's the point? She threw her hands up, frustration breaking through her usual composure. We have access to a being with knowledge of thousands of civilizations, and you're saying we can't use that? We're just supposed to feel observed while we potentially drive ourselves extinct? The point, I said carefully, is that the choice has to be ours. Don't you see? Every species that failed did so because they chose power over wisdom, short-term gains over long-term survival. If Subject Epsilon 7 gave us a roadmap, if they handed us the solution, we'd just be following someone else's path. We wouldn't learn, we wouldn't grow, we'd be children following instructions, not adults making choices. Voss sat back, the anger draining from her face, replaced by something bleaker. Despair, maybe, or just exhaustion. So we're on our own. We've always been on our own. Subject Epsilon 7 is just helping us see that clearly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment, a sterile two-bedroom unit in base housing that I'd barely bothered to furnish, and stared at the ceiling, thinking about all those dead worlds, all those failed civilizations, all that potential snuffed out by the same pattern, repeated across the cosmos like a cruel joke. And I thought about humanity, about everything we'd accomplished, art and music and literature, medicine and engineering, the small daily kindnesses and the great acts of courage, all of it balanced on a knife's edge between continuation and extinction. Subject Epsilon 7 was watching us, recording us, preparing to file us away in whatever vast archive its people maintained. The question was whether we'd join the hundreds who failed or the handful who survived. And nobody, not me, not Voss, not the President or the UN or any government on Earth, could answer that question, because it wasn't a question that could be answered in advance. It could only be lived. We'd know which side we fell on when it was already too late to choose differently. The Epsilon Project had always existed in a legal and ethical gray zone, but my conversation with Voss had crystallized something I'd been avoiding for years. We were complicit in a fundamental injustice. Subject Epsilon 7 had never chosen to be here. It had been captured, isolated, studied, however humanely we tried to justify it, for 4 decades. I began questioning the foundation of everything we were doing. Dr. Voss noticed the shift immediately. In our weekly briefings, I became more confrontational. I challenged protocols, questioned the necessity of certain tests, started advocating for what I called provisional release, a controlled reintroduction to the natural environment with monitoring. Absolutely not, Voss said flatly. Jonathan, you know as well as I do what would happen if Subject Epsilon 7 were discovered. Every government on Earth would scramble to acquire it. It would be dissected, weaponized, or worse. We're not just protecting national security, we're protecting it. By imprisoning it, by preventing something infinitely worse. She wasn't wrong. I'd seen the classified briefings. The Soviet Union had spent decades searching for evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, not for peaceful contact, but for technological advantage. China's military had entire divisions dedicated to exotic weapons research. Even allied nations couldn't be trusted with something this significant. The geopolitical implications were catastrophic, but that didn't make it right. I started spending longer hours in Chamber 14C, not conducting formal research, but simply talking. The neural interface had improved dramatically over the years. Conversations that once took hours of careful concept building now flowed almost naturally, though always with that slight distance, the awareness that we were thinking in translation. One evening, late in my shift, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Do you hate us? For keeping you here? Subject Epsilon 7 considered this. Its bioluminescence dimmed slightly, a sign of deep introspection I'd learned to recognize. Hate requires surprise, it finally responded. I knew the risks when I came. You came knowing you might be captured. All observation carries risk. Your species had already demonstrated the capacity to capture what it doesn't understand. This was predictable. But you came anyway. Why? The response was layered, complex. I felt dedication, purpose. Something almost like love, though that word doesn't quite capture it. The closest translation would be, because consciousness is precious. Every instance of it, no matter how brief or how troubled, deserves to be witnessed, to be remembered, even if we destroy ourselves, especially then. The turning point came in 1998, during what would become known as the Empathy Protocol. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist who joined the project the previous year, had been developing a bidirectional interface upgrade. Unlike previous versions that only translated concepts, this one would allow actual experience sharing, emotions, memories, sensory data. The ethical review board debated it for months. The potential for psychological harm to both parties was enormous. We'd be opening our minds to something fundamentally alien, and vice versa. The risks range from simple confusion to complete psychotic break. But Subject Epsilon 7 agreed to try. Through the standard interface, it communicated something that shook me. You have lived with not understanding me. Allow me to share that burden. The first full immersion session took place on November 3rd, 1998. I sat in the neural interface chair while Dr. Chen monitored my vitals. Subject Epsilon 7 sat across from me, separated by glass, but connected by technology that was part machine, part improvisation, part prayer. When the connection engaged fully, I stopped being myself. I was Subject Epsilon 7, feeling time differently. Not as a river, but as an ocean, where past and present floated together. I felt its memories not as sequences, but as landscapes I could wander through. I experienced the world through senses I didn't have words for. Color became three-dimensional. Sound had texture. The air itself sang with information. Electromagnetic fields, gravitational gradients, the biosignatures of every living thing nearby creating a symphony of presence. And I felt its loneliness. Not the acute loneliness of social isolation, but something deeper. The loneliness of being the only member of your species for light years in any direction, of speaking a language no one else can truly understand, of carrying knowledge and perspective that can never be fully shared because the experiential gap is too vast. But beneath that loneliness was something else, purpose. Subject Epsilon 7 had chosen this isolation, had volunteered for it, because someone needed to witness, someone needed to remember. And if that meant spending decades in a sterile chamber, light years from home, watching a species teeter on the edge of extinction, then that was the price of the work. I felt its love for humanity, not despite our flaws, but because of them. Because we were struggling, growing, hurting, learning. Because consciousness was precious in all its forms. And we were one more voice in the cosmic chorus, a voice that might go silent soon, or might learn to sing forever. Then the connection reversed, and Subject Epsilon 7 was experiencing me. When the session ended, I was crying. So was Dr. Chen. The monitoring equipment showed Subject Epsilon 7's bioluminescence pulsing rapidly. What we'd learned was its equivalent of strong emotion. Through the standard interface, it sent a single thought. Now you understand why I cannot leave, and why you cannot let me. It was right. I'd felt its dedication to the work of witnessing, but I'd also felt what would happen if it were discovered by a world not ready for it. The fear, the violence, the dissections disguised as research. It had seen it happen before on other worlds. First contact going catastrophically wrong because one species was too immature to handle the existence of another. We were its protectors as much as its captors. The injustice was real, but the alternative was worse. That realization didn't make the situation ethical. It just made it necessary. By 2005, Subject Epsilon 7 and I had achieved something unprecedented in human history. Genuine dialogue with a non-human intelligence. The neural interface had become almost transparent. We could discuss abstract philosophy, share memories, even joke, though humor translated poorly across species. It was during this period that Subject Epsilon 7 decided to share what it called the essential message, the core wisdom its people had distilled from watching hundreds of civilizations rise and fall. I'd been asking for this, in various forms, for years. Subject Epsilon 7 had always deflected, insisting that telling me the answer would defeat the purpose. But something had shifted. Maybe it sensed we were running out of time. Maybe it decided humanity had earned the knowledge. Or maybe it simply decided the risk of sharing was less than the risk of our continued ignorance. The session began ordinarily enough. I arrived at 0600, went through security, descended to chamber 14C. Subject Epsilon 7 was already at the interface station, waiting. Its bioluminescence was particularly bright. Anticipation I'd learned to recognize. Today I will tell you what I have learned, it communicated. What we have learned across millennia of observation. But you must understand, this is not instruction, it is description. The difference is everything. I settled into the neural interface chair, nodded my readiness. What followed was the most profound 4 hours of my life. Subject Epsilon 7 began with a concept it called the threshold, the moment when a species develops technology capable of reshaping its environment faster than evolutionary adaptation can compensate. For humanity, this threshold arrived roughly 10,000 years ago with agriculture. But the critical acceleration began in the 18th century with industrialization. Every species crosses this threshold, Subject Epsilon 7 explained. It is not evil, it is inevitable. Tool use leads to technology, technology leads to power, power leads to the threshold. The question is not whether you will cross it, but what you do after. The species that survived, the rare ones, all made similar choices, though the specifics varied. They recognized limits, not as restrictions imposed by scarcity, but as boundaries chosen by wisdom. They understood that infinite growth on a finite world was mathematical impossibility, not just philosophical preference. They prioritized long-term survival over short-term comfort. They made sacrifices, gave up technologies that felt beneficial in the moment but were catastrophic across generations, chose boring sustainability over exciting expansion. They developed collective decision-making structures that could think beyond individual lifespans. They found ways to make their governance systems care about people who hadn't been born yet. They cultivated wisdom as carefully as they cultivated knowledge. They understood that the ability to do something didn't make it good to do. They built ethics into their education, their culture, their very sense of identity. Most importantly, they learned to see themselves as part of a system, not separate from it. They stopped thinking of nature as something to conquer and started thinking of themselves as nature. They recognized that their survival was inseparable from the survival of their ecosystems. These principles seem simple, Subject Epsilon 7 communicated, its bioluminescence pulsing with something like sadness, but they require something that is almost impossible for young species, the ability to act against immediate self-interest for abstract future benefit, to care about people you will never meet, to restrain power voluntarily, to choose enough over more. That's the pattern? I asked. The ones who survive are the ones who learn restraint. The ones who survive are the ones who mature faster than they accumulate power. It is a race between wisdom and capability. When wisdom wins, civilizations persist. When capability wins, they collapse. I thought about human history, about every empire that had ever fallen because it grew beyond its ability to sustain itself. Rome, the Maya, Easter Island. The pattern was there, written in ruins across our own world. What about intelligence? I asked. Surely smarter species are more likely to survive. Intelligence is neutral, Subject Epsilon 7 responded. A tool, like fire, useful for warmth or destruction, depending on how it is wielded. We have watched species far more intelligent than yours drive themselves extinct. And we have watched species that would seem primitive by your standards persist for hundreds of thousands of years, because they understood balance. Then what determines who makes it? Subject Epsilon 7 moved closer to the glass barrier. I could see my reflection in its large, dark eyes, a small, fragile human studying something vast and ancient. Values, it said simply. What a species values determines what it protects, and what it protects determines what survives. Over the following sessions, Subject Epsilon 7 elaborated on this theme through specific examples from its archives. A species that valued competition above cooperation collapsed when competition fractured them into warring factions that consumed themselves. A species that valued certainty above truth rejected evidence of ecological collapse until it was too late to adapt. A species that valued comfort above sustainability drained their world of resources and starved in luxury. A species that valued their own present above all future generations left their descendants nothing but poison. But also, a species that valued community above individual accumulation survived a resource crisis by sharing rather than hoarding. A species that valued curiosity above dogma adapted to radical climate change by embracing new ways of living. A species that valued the health of their world as inseparable from their own health created a civilization that had existed for 200,000 years and counting. Your species contains all these values, Subject Epsilon 7 told me. Competition and cooperation, certainty and curiosity, comfort and sustainability, present and future. You are not uniform, you are diverse. This is your greatest strength and your most profound vulnerability. Because we could go either way, because you're going both ways simultaneously. And the question is, which impulse will dominate when critical choices must be made? I sat with this for a long time. Outside the facility, above the 4 levels of concrete and steel that separated us from the surface world, 7 billion humans were living their lives, making choices, building futures, driving toward some horizon none of us could see clearly. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, Subject Epsilon 7's people were watching, recording, preparing to remember us, either as one of the rare species that learned wisdom in time, or as another tragic example of potential unfulfilled. Is there still hope? I asked finally. For us? Or have you already seen how this ends? Subject Epsilon 7's bioluminescence brightened, and through the interface came something I hadn't felt from it before, genuine uncertainty. I do not know, it admitted. Your species is unusual, more chaotic than most, more creative, more contradictory. You invent poetry and nuclear weapons with equal enthusiasm. You can be cruel beyond measure and compassionate beyond reason, sometimes in the same breath. You are unpredictable. That sounds like a criticism. It is observation, and perhaps hope, because predictable species are easier to forecast, and I have watched many predictable species fall. But you? It paused, and I felt something almost like admiration. You might surprise us. You have before. The burden of what I had learned sat on me like physical weight. I'd been given a cosmic perspective on human survival, and I had no idea what to do with it. The information was too vast, too abstract, too removed from the daily reality of policy and politics to translate into actionable recommendations. More troubling, I'd signed documents ensuring I could never share what I knew. The Epsilon Project existed in the deepest levels of classification. Everything Subject Epsilon 7 told me was automatically considered above top secret. I couldn't publish, couldn't consult, couldn't even hint at the source of my perspective in academic conversations. I was living with the most important information in human history, and I was legally bound to silence. The frustration was maddening. Dr. Voss recognized the change in me. In a rare moment of personal conversation over bad coffee in her office, she addressed it directly. "You're struggling with the knowledge burden," she said. Not a question. We have evidence, hard, documented evidence, that humanity is following a pattern that has led to extinction for hundreds of other species, and we're doing nothing with it. We're just watching. The same way Subject Epsilon 7 watches us. What would you have us do, Jonathan? Go public? Announce that we've been holding an alien captive for decades, and it's been telling us we're probably doomed? That would cause global panic, religious upheaval, geopolitical chaos. The cure would be worse than the disease. So we just sit here with this information? We document, we learn, we do our jobs. She set down her coffee, leaned forward. But off the record, I've been feeding certain findings into policy recommendations through carefully sanitized channels, environmental impact assessments, long-term sustainability studies, nothing that reveals the source, but everything that might nudge decision makers toward better choices. Is it working? She laughed bitterly. Does the world look like it's making better choices to you? The truth was, the world was not making better choices. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw accelerating climate change, environmental degradation, and resource depletion. The pattern Subject Epsilon 7 had warned about was playing out in real time. Short-term thinking, competition for dwindling resources, technological power racing ahead of collective wisdom. I watched the news with a perspective no other human had. Every report on deforestation, every debate about fossil fuels, every conflict over water rights. I saw it through the lens of those hundreds of dead civilizations. We were following the script, playing our part in a tragedy that had been performed countless times across the galaxy. And I could do nothing but watch. The personal toll was severe. My marriage had ended years earlier. Collateral damage of a career that required absolute secrecy and consumed all available time. I had no children, few friends. My entire adult life had been spent in a sterile chamber beneath the New Mexico desert, talking to a being from another world while my own species stumbled toward potential extinction. In 2010, I suffered what the doctors diplomatically called acute stress response. I collapsed during a session, overwhelmed by the weight of everything I carried. They found me unconscious at my station, the neural interface still active. Subject Epsilon 7 on the other side of the glass, with its bioluminescence pulsing rapidly, and what I later understood was alarm. I took a forced sabbatical, 3 months away from the facility, therapy, medication, and long walks in the actual forest. The real thing, not the sterile environment of Chamber 14C. I tried to reconnect with the surface world, with normal human concerns and simple pleasures. It didn't work. How could it? I'd seen too much, understood too much. The gap between my perspective and everyone else's was too vast to bridge. I returned to the facility after 2 months, unable to stay away. The work was the only thing that made sense anymore. Subject Epsilon 7 greeted my return with what I had learned to recognize as relief. Through the interface, it communicated something unexpected. I was worried. You are important. Important how? I'm just one human. One researcher documenting your documentation. You understand, it responded simply. You have seen what I see, felt what I feel. There are very few beings in the universe capable of that bridge. You are precious. The irony wasn't lost on me. I felt increasingly alienated from my own species, while an actual alien considered me valuable precisely because I could understand its alien perspective. Tell me honestly, I said, based on everything you've observed about humanity, everything you've learned about how species survive or fail, what are our chances? Subject Epsilon 7 was quiet for a long time. When it finally responded, the answer was both crushing and liberating. I do not calculate probabilities, I witness, but if I must estimate, based on patterns and current trajectories, a pause, 30%, perhaps less, 30% chance of survival, of choosing survival over extinction when the critical moment comes. It has not come yet, but it will. Soon, by your species timescale. How soon? Within the lifetime of children being born today. That night I wrote a letter I would never send, a document that exists in classified archives, detailing everything I'd learned from Subject Epsilon 7 about the patterns of civilization, the choices that lead to survival, the values that determine outcome. I titled it Letter to the Future, and addressed it to whoever might read it after we'd already made our choice, whether that reader was human or another species. Subject Epsilon 7's people would send to document what we'd left behind. In it, I wrote, we knew. That's what I want you to understand. We weren't ignorant, we had warning, we had evidence, we had time. If we failed, it wasn't because we couldn't have known better. It was because we chose not to act on what we knew. I sealed it in the archive system with instructions that it be opened in 2050, or upon the dissolution of the facility, or upon the extinction of humanity, whichever came first. Then I went back to work. By 2015, I'd spent 28 years in regular communication with Subject Epsilon 7. We'd developed something beyond professional relationship, beyond even friendship in the traditional sense. We'd achieved a form of understanding that perhaps no human and non-human intelligence had ever reached. And it was in that 28th year that Subject Epsilon 7 began to change. The changes were subtle at first. Its bioluminescence patterns shifted slightly. Its periods of rest became longer. Its movements, always deliberate, became more economical, as if conserving energy. Dr. Chen ran comprehensive medical scans. What she found was troubling. Subject Epsilon 7 was aging rapidly. Its cellular structures showed degradation patterns consistent with advanced senescence. It's dying, Chen told me bluntly. I can't say how long it has. Its biology is too different from anything we understand, but the trajectory is clear. Months, maybe? Certainly less than a year? I went to Chamber 14C that evening outside my normal schedule. Subject Epsilon 7 was sitting in its customary position, but there was a fragility to it I'd never seen before. Through the interface, I felt what I'd been dreading. Acceptance. You're dying, I said unnecessarily. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? We could have tried treatments, medical intervention. This is natural, expected. My biology was never designed for this world's gravity, atmospheric composition, radiation exposure. I have lived far longer here than projections suggested. But all things end. How long? Weeks, perhaps days. The timeline is uncertain. I felt panic rising. We need to contact your people. Let them know. They could send help, medical technology. They know. They have always known. And they understand, as I understand, that this is the completion of my purpose. Your purpose was to die in a cage on an alien world? The bioluminescence flared with something like amusement. My purpose was to witness, to understand, to remember. I have done these things. The location of my body's final rest is insignificant. Over the following weeks, I spent every possible moment with Subject Epsilon 7. We talked, though talked is inadequate for the exchange of concepts and experiences that occurred through the neural interface. We reviewed memories, shared perspectives, said things that had gone unsaid in nearly 3 decades of interaction. It told me about its homeworld, a place of deep oceans and bioluminescent cities beneath ice sheets, where its people had evolved in the crushing darkness and emerged already adapted to think about time and space differently than species that evolved under open skies. It told me about the first time it saw Earth from orbit, the breathtaking fragility of it, the thin shell of atmosphere protecting an island of life in an ocean of void, how it felt both love and grief in that moment, knowing what it might have to witness. It told me about other species it had documented, the aquatic civilization that had thrived for 500,000 years in perfect equilibrium with their world, the species that had destroyed themselves in a single afternoon of cascading nuclear exchange, the ones who simply gave up, losing the will to continue for reasons Subject Epsilon 7's people never fully understood. And it told me why it had chosen me, specifically, to be its primary contact. You have what most of your species lacks, it communicated. Not intelligence. Many humans are intelligent. Not compassion. Many humans are compassionate. You have the ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously without requiring them to resolve. You can know that humanity might fail and still work toward success. You can see the enormity of the universe and still care about individual lives. This is rare. This is valuable. It mostly just feels like cognitive dissonance, I admitted. Perhaps that is what wisdom feels like before it becomes integrated. 3 days before Subject Epsilon 7 died, it asked me to do something I'd never considered. remove the barrier. The glass? I asked, shocked. You want us to remove the physical separation? I want to touch you. Once, before I end. We have been separated by matter and meaning for decades. I would like to know what human warmth feels like directly, not translated through sensors. The request went through every level of security review. Biological contamination risks were assessed, psychological evaluations were conducted, contingency plans were drafted. But ultimately, given Subject Epsilon 7's condition and the unprecedented nature of the situation, approval was granted. They scheduled it for a Saturday evening when minimal staff would be present. Dr. Voss, Dr. Chen, and 3 security personnel. They opened a small section of the barrier, a doorway-sized panel that could be sealed again in seconds if needed. I stepped through. The atmosphere in chamber 14C was different on the inside. The temperature, the humidity, the quality of the light, all carefully calibrated for Subject Epsilon 7's comfort. But it was the sound that struck me most, or rather, the silence. Without the barrier, without any interference, the chamber was profoundly quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat. Subject Epsilon 7 stood slowly, a gesture that clearly cost it significant effort. We approached each other across the sterile floor, met in the center of the space. Up close, without glass between us, Subject Epsilon 7 was both more alien and more familiar than I'd ever perceived. I could see the subtle texture of its skin, the way its bioluminescence pulsed beneath the surface like slow lightning. Its eyes, all 4 of them, held depths I could fall into. It raised one long-fingered hand. I raised mine. Our palms met. Its skin was cool, smooth, with a faint electric tingle where we touched. And through that physical contact, with the neural interface amplifying and translating, I felt something indescribable. Not quite emotion, not quite thought. A direct transmission of being to being, consciousness to consciousness, without the barriers of language or culture or biology. I felt its gratitude, its respect, its hope for humanity despite everything it had witnessed, its peace with ending. And beneath all of that, a vast loneliness finally, briefly breached. We stood like that for perhaps 5 minutes. Then Subject Epsilon 7 withdrew its hand, returned to its sitting position, and through the interface sent its final lesson. Remember that you were witnessed. Remember that you mattered. And remember that the choice is still yours to make. Subject Epsilon 7 died 2 days later at 3:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I wasn't present. It happened during the overnight monitoring shift. But they told me it was peaceful. Its bioluminescence gradually dimmed until it simply went dark. No struggle. No distress. Just a consciousness returning to whatever vast silence it had emerged from. They asked me to perform the autopsy. I refused. Subject Epsilon 7 deserved better than to have its final dignity stripped away in the name of science. We'd learned what we needed to learn while it lived. Cutting it apart after death would teach us only about biology, and biology was never the point. Instead, I advocated for what I called a dignified disposition. It took months of bureaucratic battles, but eventually I won. Subject Epsilon 7's body was cremated according to protocols its people had shared regarding their own funeral practices, a combination of heat and sonic frequencies that reduced organic matter to a fine crystalline ash. That ash now sits in a sealed container in my possession, and when I retire, or die, whichever comes first, it will be scattered in the Pacific Northwest forests, in one of the old growth areas where light barely reaches the forest floor, a place of silence and shadow in ancient life, where Subject Epsilon 7 might have felt at home if circumstances had been different. I'm 73 now. I retired from active research in 2018, though I still consult on the archives. The vast database of conversations, neural interface recordings, and observational data accumulated over 3 decades. Young researchers come to me with questions, treating me like some kind of oracle who spoke with an alien sage. They're not entirely wrong. The Epsilon project officially closed in 2020. The facility was decommissioned, the equipment archived, the personnel dispersed to other classified projects. As far as the government is concerned, the matter is concluded. 1 alien documented, studied, and deceased, case closed. But for me, the work has never ended. I spend my time now trying to translate what Subject Epsilon 7 taught me into something actionable. I consult, anonymously, with environmental organizations, sustainability think tanks, long-term policy groups. I can't tell them where my perspective comes from, but I can share the insights, the patterns of civilizational collapse, the values that correlate with survival, the critical importance of thinking beyond quarterly reports and election cycles. Does it make a difference? I honestly don't know. What I do know is that humanity is still racing toward its threshold moment. Climate change accelerates, ecosystems collapse, resources dwindle, inequality widens. And the technologies that could save us or doom us, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, geoengineering, advance faster than our collective wisdom about how to use them. We're still following the pattern, the same pattern that killed hundreds of species across the galaxy. The pattern Subject Epsilon 7 spent its final decades watching us reenact. But, and this is the thing I hold onto in dark moments, the pattern isn't destiny, it's tendency. Subject Epsilon 7 was clear about that. Every species that failed had the opportunity to choose differently. They simply didn't. They couldn't overcome the momentum of their own worst impulses. The question is whether we can. I think about subject Epsilon 7 constantly, not the biological specimen, but the being, the consciousness that chose to spend decades in isolation, light years from home, watching us stumble and struggle and occasionally shine. What kind of dedication does that require? What depth of purpose? And I think about what it told me in our final conversations, the core message it wanted me to carry forward. You are not special, but you are precious. Your existence matters. Your choices have weight. And the fact that others have failed does not mean you must. That's what its people do, I've come to understand. They witness. They remember. They hold space for the possibility that consciousnness, rare and fragile as it is, might persist, might thrive, might surprise them by choosing wisdom over power, long-term survival over short-term gain. They're archivists, yes, but they're also believers. They believe in the potential of intelligence to transcend its own worst tendencies. They've seen it happen rarely enough to make it precious, but often enough to make it possible. Subject Epsilon 7 believed in humanity's potential, right up to its final breath. The least I can do is try to prove it right. Sometimes, late at night in my small house in the mountains of New Mexico, I take out the Neural Interface Archive, a personal copy I made before the project closed. I put on the headset, load a recorded session, and experience the memories again. Subject Epsilon 7's perspective, its thoughts, the feeling of being understood by something vast and ancient. And I remember what it showed me in those final sessions. All those dead worlds, all those failed civilizations, but also, and this is crucial, the ones that survived, the aquatic species that chose restraint. The methane breathers who prioritized collective welfare, the silicon-based intelligence that learned to exist in stable equilibrium with its environment for hundreds of thousands of years. They did it. They faced the same threshold we face now, and they chose differently. They proved it's possible. We can too. If you're reading this, and if you've made it this far through what is essentially the memoir of an old man who spent his career talking to an alien in a box, then maybe you're one of the people who can help us choose differently. Maybe you're a scientist who can communicate complex truths simply. Maybe you're a policymaker who can think beyond election cycles. Maybe you're an educator who can help the next generation develop wisdom alongside intelligence. Maybe you're just someone who cares about the future and is willing to make sacrifices for people you'll never meet. Whoever you are, you're part of the pattern. You're one of the variables in the equation that determines whether humanity survives its own power. Subject Epsilon 7 would want you to know, your choices matter, your values matter. The way you think about the future, the way you treat the world, the way you balance short-term desires against long-term consequences, it all matters. We're still being watched. Somewhere out in the darkness between stars, Subject Epsilon 7's people maintain their vigil, recording, remembering, hoping that we'll be one of the rare ones that will surprise them. Let's surprise them. There are places in this world where silence still speaks. Forests where the light filters green through ancient canopy. Deserts where stars fill the sky with depth beyond comprehension. Oceans where life persists in forms we barely understand. In those places, if you're quiet enough, if you listen carefully enough, you can almost feel it. The weight of attention. The sense of being witnessed by something patient and vast and profoundly invested in whether we make it or not. Subject Epsilon 7 taught me that consciousness is precious. That intelligence is a gift that carries responsibilities we're only beginning to understand, that the ability to reshape our world is meaningless without the wisdom to reshape it well, and that the story isn't over yet. We're still writing it. Every choice we make, every value we embrace or reject, every time we choose between more and enough, between power and restraint, between present comfort and future survival, the ending hasn't been determined yet, it's still ours to write.